So a little bit about American Farmland Trust. For those of you who don't know, is we have three main goals, and that's to keep farmers on the land, to protect farmland, and then to promote sound farming practices. So the idea is, protecting farmland will keep farmers on the land, and then having sustainable practices that are both economic and environmentally sustainable will also keep farmers on the land. So I do the promoting the sound farming practices piece. We have many other programs across the country and within New York State. So part of what I've done to promote sound farming practices is establish the Genesee River Demonstration Farm Network in Western New York. And the main idea is that we picked farmers that had already had quite a bit of success and a lot of history with soil health practices, reduced tillage, nutrient management, cover cropping, that sort of thing. And so we're just taking those stories and bringing them to a local level. So we're focused on Western New York, but this model could be used elsewhere, and we probably will be adding more farms towards Central and Eastern New York. So yeah, learning from local farmers with successful soil health implementation. And so we are taking a lot of measurements in terms of economic benefits and costs from their real life experiences. And that's the other thing, is that these are real farms. They're not research plots and small scale. These are large farms. A few of the farms are over 10,000 acres. I think the smallest farm and that has research being done on it is like maybe 850 acres. So these are real farms doing these practices with the equipment that they have and the resources they have. So we're quantifying things, and then we also have qualitative information as well to learn about soil quality, things you can't really measure, like the soil's softer, or there's less erosion, things that we are not directly measuring. So they've learned how to integrate these practices into their system. So we're just highlighting these farmers and trying to show other farmers that it can be done. And so we try to get a variety of farmers as well, so that farmers can relate to them. Other farmers can relate to them. So yeah, we're in the Genesee River currently, although so we started with these two blue dots there are the original two farms in the network, and we're now at 19 farms 5 years later. And so right now we have just these 19 farms alone are over 50,000 acres and nearly 6,000 head of livestock. The one farm there off to the right, that's in Groton. That's probably the farthest we go now to the east. But like I said, we're looking to find some more farms here in the future to work with. The key components of the demo farm network is that it is farmer-led research. So I worked with the farmers so I had the general idea of planting green, but they didn't have to do that, but they all wanted to. I had the general idea of having some type of plots. They all were agreeable to replicated field trials, but they don't have to be. One advantage of not working for a university is I don't have to publish results or anything like that. So I just can have a lot more freedom in working with the farmers and what I need. It's really more about what the farmer needs. So we do have replicated trials. We get a lot of the historic information, the economic and field data, that sort of thing, yield from the farmers. We do have participation payments for the farmers, so they get an annual payment just for their time and effort of getting us this information. And the farmers are the ones, of course, delivering the conservation activities. A couple of the farms, actually, we have a net returns guarantee payment for yield losses. So if there's a catastrophic loss on their plots, we will pay them for that loss compared to what the control was. Yeah, and we have other programs for conservation on rented lands, but yeah, so we have a lot of partners. We have mostly been working with Cooperative Extension and Western New York Crop Management, but like Patty mentioned, we are looking forward to collaborating with ACS as well here moving forward. You know, this position was brand new when I started it, and it's just being built. So, you know, these things take time. So, you know, Dave, I had a relationship with. It was easy to get started with him, but, you know, definitely looking to grow and expand partnerships there because there's a lot to be done. So these are some of the farmers that are involved. So I just put this photo up to show that these are just real people you work with, you know, people that you know probably, or people like them. They're just real farms with real problems that they have to find solutions for. These are just a couple photos of some of the practices they're doing. So, but mostly, you know, we can get these photos. We have funding, we can take photos, we can share them. So that's another benefit of the network. So probably the biggest cornerstone of the network is that I've written several economic and environmental case studies. So right now we're up to 9 from these farms in the network. They're all featuring the demonstration farmers. And we wanted people, mostly farmers, to read them. So the goal was to keep them short and colorful. So there are only 2 pages. So we have this first page that gives the background to the farm and then sort of introduces the idea of the economic evaluation and environmental evaluation. And then we just have this back. So it's just 2 pages front and back. And the main piece of this is the economic analyses that we do on their soil health adoption. So I'll talk a little bit more about this, but yeah, this is the cornerstone is basically showing that their bottom line actually can improve by adopting these practices. So what we do for this, because now I'm going to get into the economics and I'm going to focus on the Mulligan farm. And yeah, if anybody has a question, please feel free to ask, but I won't be able to see it. So someone would have to tell me that there's a question. So feel free to interrupt me or to type in a question, but I won't see the chat. So with the marginal, so what we do is a marginal analysis. So we look at only the things that changed. So we assume like on the farm that, you know, everything pretty much stays the same. You have the same buildings, the same people and that sort of thing. But when you adopt a practice, you're looking at what changes. And so these 2 tables here become like a balance, right? So we're just looking at things that change. So if you, let's say, if you reduce your tillage, you're basically saving money, you know, by not having to pay for fuel and labor and machinery degradation, that sort of thing. So you're kind of putting the balance towards the decreased cost or increased in income. And then, but you have costs. You have to buy seed. You may have to do an extra spray or that sort of thing. You have to learn how to plant cover crops correctly or change your nutrient management. So then the balance kind of heads over towards decreasing your income. But you know, what a farmer wants is for the balance obviously to shift towards the green. And so that's what we're looking at, but just what changed. So, okay, we took away tillage, but we added cover crop seed. And then overall, what's the balance? So looking at that for Mulligan Farm. So, so Forrest Watson is who we worked with. And this farm's in Livingston County. It's outside of Avon. Well, it's actually in Avon, never mind. And so this farm is 2,618 acres, and they grow corn silage, corn grain, wheat, and alfalfa. And so he originally started with no-till in 2014, I believe it was, and soon after tried to adopt cover crops and had a bad year, but they did change things up a little bit. So they've been basically doing these practices. Nutrient management started a little earlier than that, but they've been doing these practices since about 2015 or so. And so he started with this because he wanted to improve the soil structure and functioning. reduce compaction, increase his infiltration, and reducing runoff and erosion. So I'm going to go into the detail a little bit more, but our analysis showed that basically they had a per acre net income of $75 per acre from adopting soil health practices. And I'll get into this a little bit more, which is 129% return on their investment. So how did they get there, or how did we get there with our analysis? So taking that table and kind of breaking it in half, and this is the increases in net income. So what we have is that so looking at what weighed the scale towards the increases is that basically they had a higher average yields on both corn, grain, and wheat. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we use the Dairy Farm Business Summary data, which goes back about 20 years. So we just picked a tipping point, which was I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2015, but we did this analysis based on assuming that they started in let's say 2015. So we looked at all their Dairy Farm Business Summary expenses from before and after. And so this is on-farm data straight from their 20 years of Dairy Farm Business Summary data. So, and it was with John Hanchar, led this analyses. So, yeah, sometimes with different audiences, I just skip that part. But anyway, with you all, I think you're familiar with that, or at least some of you would be. So this Dairy Farm Business Summary reported higher average yields on both corn, grain, and wheat. And they modified their crop rotation with an increase in acres planted in high value wheat and more consistent wheat planting. So that's another thing that we're seeing is, like, by reducing some activities, it frees up time so that they could focus on things that help them manage their farm more efficiently, or in this case, planting a higher value crop.
Hey, Aaron, I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not familiar with the dairy farm business study. And I was reading this one on Mulligan's earlier. The increase in value of crops is based on what is it, higher yields. Was this from a replicated test plot then, or was it compared to the dairy farm business study that they had higher yields?
Yeah. So good question. So I do have, yeah, I didn't clarify that for this. I do have replicated plots on Mulligan Farm. We have done an economic analysis on those plots, but I didn't really have it in a good format to share today. So this is their entire farm. So it's looking at that 268 acres. Sorry, 2,618 acres. So this was looking at the entire farm. And looking at basically there's these different categories. There's other categories, but we looked at the ones related to crops in the Dairy Farm Business Summary. And so we looked at these specific categories. So values of crop harvested, machinery, fertilizer, fuels, and oils and greases.
But
These were the categories that
the increase in yields then is versus what their whole farm average was.
no, it's looking at the average yields before 2015 and the average yields after 2015, which is when they adopted the practices.
Okay.
So it's compared to the prior to the before. There's basically two scenarios, a before and an after. So the yields, so just the data alone showed that the yields increased.
For
Just
one
by,
year versus the whole farm average for the whatever it was previous.
no, it's like the average of the previous, I don't know how far back, because we did do this study using the Dairy Farm Business Summary on a few different farms. I'm going to say like it went to, let's say 2000, right? So it's the average yields from 2000 to 2014 compared to the average yields from 2015 to 2022.
Okay.
Yeah. And,
Neat.
some of this is because of genetics and that sort of thing. It's not all soil health. But the question that we're asking here is, so with the Dairy Farm Business Summary analyses, what we're asking is, can a farm adopt these practices and remain profitable? We're not saying necessarily that the soil health practices themselves made the farm profitable. It's just they did adopt these practices, and look, they're profitable after that. Or not profitable, but so far everyone's been more profitable.
Thanks, Aaron.
Okay. Those, I didn't get into all that. So those are all good questions. They make a difference. Yeah, so thank you for asking that. That helped clarify kind of what's happening here. So had the increase in yield. The other thing about the yield that we're seeing with the dairy farm business summary databases is, maybe the yield isn't that dramatic, but it's stabilized. So that the kind of the swings that you get from different years from the weather and that sort of thing, that those swings are a lot less after they've adopted the soil health practices. So there's more of a yield stability, I would say, than necessarily. I'm still not going to try to talk about yield increases. I would hate to make that promise, but I do feel comfortable saying that yields do stabilize. So you're not getting the big losses that you might when severe weather does happen. So the other reason why there was a net increase in income is because there was a decrease in costs, like I mentioned before. So as you can imagine, you're doing less tillage, all your machinery and fuels and that sort of thing. Those costs go down. And then he's also really seen his fertilizer applications almost go to nothing. So he's getting better nutrient capture with cover crops and injecting manure. So the bottom line here is that they have an annual increase in net income of $133. But then there's the negative effects of soil health adoption. So we have, basically there was no loss of yield. So that was a 0. And then there were seeds and plants, sprays, and other expenses. Machinery, repair, and farm vehicle did also have a cost. So I think that, some of these costs aren't because of soil health. They upgraded certain machines like manure equipment and harvesting trucks, and that sort of thing was reflected in these costs. So you could see then that they have this decreased income of $58 per acre. So looking at the whole thing, when you take the $133 of increased and subtract the $58 of decrease, then that's where we got the $75. And like I said, the return on investment is 129%. And this is just kind of breaking it out a little bit clearer. So this was his motivation. So he originally went to a no-till conference. So, maybe that's something you can try to get your clients to do, is to try to go to these conferences. There's a lot of this stuff out there now, maybe too much, but there are opportunities. He saw success of his neighbors. So again, that's kind of what the motivation of the Demo Farm Network is. And he wanted to regenerate soil function, improve soil biota, and be more productive with fewer inputs. With the no-till drill, we're capable of planting more acres given available resources. And that's one thing that he really highlighted a lot, was that, they just have more time now to be more efficient in their operation. And I'll get to this later, but this is their planting green plot here, and he's rolling this down there, but you could see quite a bit of biomass there. So some of the barriers that Mulligan has faced was the first year was a failure. So they tried to interseed ryegrass into corn using a broadcaster, and it got shaded out, and it was also dry. So they used a drill in year 2. So they still saw better results with that. And I think that I hear that all the time, that basically broadcasting doesn't work and drilling does. At least it's more reliable. So in year 3, they had a very dry year, but the increased soil moisture from the cover crop and no-till led to a successful crop. So now they're cover cropping, everything that's not already covered by their grasses or winter wheat. And they use a 6-way mix, which I don't have readily available off the top of my head, but I could share that later.
When do they drill it into the corn?
Well, they're not interseeding now, so they just plant it after. They
Oh, okay.
basically go through with the planter right as they're harvesting. In fact, well, I guess this is part of the trials, but yeah, when I went to set up his planting green trials, I wanted a no cover control, and he wouldn't let me do that. So we had to modify his trial because he was just like, I'm not comfortable leaving any of the field bare. So he's committed. Yeah, so some of the environmental observations. So there are those benefits as well. Saving time and fuel with less tillage. They're increasing their organic matter and reducing their synthetic inputs. Yeah, cover crops are improving the soil over time, which enables the no-till. They're often using strip till on newer fields that they're acquiring and then transitioning to no-till. And then, yeah, they're seeing reduced erosion, increased infiltration. These are all the things we hear about all the time that these practices do. So he's seeing them firsthand on his farm. And so, yeah, the need to this is a quote from him, the need to till due to compaction is virtually gone. He's breaking up compaction with roots instead of iron. So yeah, so he was able to adopt soil health practices while improving economic performance. Like I said, he had higher average yields, reduced erosion, and so these two slides here, I'm going to skip over because I already said them, but I left them in here because I'm going to share this presentation and then someone can read it later without me actually talking. So I left these two slides in here for you all. Again, this is his planting green plots with, they do a burn down here. So a lot of biomass there. So I'm going to sort of start to transition away from mulligan. And so I wasn't, exactly sure on the audience. So I even though I have data on forest plots, I thought sharing data from another two farms would be more useful to you all. But I did share the plot results in the PDF in the email that Patty sent out. But I could pivot. I can pull that up and talk about that, or I can share about the planting green from two other farms that are in Western New York that I also have economic data for. I thought you would all find that not more interesting, but just a little bit more relevant. So that's what I'm going to go with. But before I get there, I did do an environmental analysis, and it's similar to how the general concept of how we did it was similar, where we took a before scenario. So with the economic data, it was a whole farm analysis. With the environmental models that I have to work with, they only do a field. So I picked a representative field out of their farm and basically said, okay, here's what they used to do. And then now they've added, reduced tillage or strip till. They've added nutrient management. They've putting less nutrients on. They're planting cover crops. And so I had a before and an after scenario as well for the environmental analysis. And I've done it on several farms. So I just summarized five Western New York farms. So one of them is looking at the water quality using the nutrient tracking tool. And like I said, there was a field, I could only use one field. So the average field size of the 5 farms was 21 acres and the range was 10 to 35 acres. So these aren't gigantic fields. And so in these like medium size, 21 acre field here, the weighted average was 31% of reduction in N losses. And this is this is for water quality. So 31% reduction in N losses, 60% reduction in phosphorus, and then 77 reduction in sediment. So significant reductions there. And then I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Comet Farm, but it looks at greenhouse gas or carbon sequestration, greenhouse gas reductions. So on these same fields, there was a weighted average increase. So the increase is carbon sequestration. So an increase of carbon in the soil of 256%, which is an average of taking about 3 cars off the road annually of just that one 21-acre field. So that would get multiplied over multiple fields, but this is just for that one field. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Cornell soil health test. So I actually took these on a different farm, but I've taken several on Mulligan farms as well, and in the replicated trials. But just for simplicity and keeping things, simple and not having throwing too much at you all at once. One thing that I like to do with the soil health test is take a sample from a nearby field that's been undisturbed for a while. So I took samples from this red area here, this field, and then I also took some samples from this forested area. So these soils are the same soils. The only difference is the management. I took this picture in this field, and you could see basically, that the Cornell test showed very high for the forest, which you would expect. But this field is also doing well in many indicators, and their overall quality score is high. So the point here is that the reduced tillage, the nutrient management, I mean, he is applying a lot of manure on this field, but that's bringing this field. He's been managing this field since the 80s. And, his management is now approaching that of the natural state. So, in maybe 10 more years or so, there'll be a lot more green here. And so the idea is, there's like a systems approach. And so if you're just doing this one practice, you're going to increase, but your soil health, but it's going to take a while and you're only going to get so far. If you start to add different practices in, you're going to get a healthier soil faster and to a higher level. So agronomically, it makes sense to adopt these practices. I've shown that kind of a systems approach for economics also makes sense because, reducing your tillage frees up money to pay for your cover crops. So having a systems approach there also helps with economics. And then environmentally as well, where you're seeing improvements there from combining practices, so that our environmental goals would be reached faster than just doing a single practice. So that is my wrap up of the case studies. I was going to go into the planting green trial. So are there any questions or comments?
No, this is great. Thank you, Erin. Does anybody else have comments? Questions?
And all the case studies are available on the Genesee River Demonstration Farm website. And they're downloadable PDFs. They can be printed off. So far, when I started doing this, I didn't, we just picked the farms and then started doing the analysis. We didn't pick them because we thought that they would have an overall economic benefit. But so far, there's been like 15 or 16 of them done across the country, and every single one of them has shown that farms are actually having a net increase in their income from soil health. So, there is that belief out there that, it's going to cost too much money or they can't do it. But we're showing that it can be done, I guess. So through these cases, the farmers are showing that it can be done. So getting into the planting green trials, it started from a story similar to this. So this was this field was alfalfa sod prior. So it was no-tilled alfalfa sod prior to planting the corn this year. Then there was a 6-inch storm event in about 2 hours. So you could see, I don't know how well this shows up in a shared slide, but this soil is lighter. You could see a lot of rocks. You could see Actually, when I pull it out further, you can see how light this soil is. It's crusting there. You could tell that. I think you've all seen this enough where there's, you know, it washed out this field. It, you know, the soil's not looking great. And but right across the street, so this photo was taken, then the photographer turned around and took a picture on the other side of the road. So same soils, same rain. Right across the street, they planted in the spring, they planted green, one bushel of wheat in the, so this is a fall wheat cover crop that they planted their corn into in the spring. So right across the street. And this is what that field looked like across the street after that same event. So the corn's looking good. That, you know, you could see where the wheat died back, but you know, the soil's looking good, but more importantly, the corn was basically untouched. And so you know, seeing stories like this, seeing how they could get into the fields earlier, they noticed in the spring because they were a little bit drier. We decided to start trying to quantify some of these benefits, and so we started the planting green trial. So that's planting a cash crops. So yeah, planting green is planting cash crops into growing living cover. So you're basically just delaying the termination of the cover crop by a week or two. And so by doing that, you're getting all the benefits that I'm sure you're all aware of with cover crops, but even more, like extra, because of that extra biomass. So you can also mitigate the challenges of a wet spring soil. Yeah, I'll show you some results here, but there's quite a bit more biomass just by waiting a week or two. And yeah, the farmers are reporting that it dries the soil at planting, but then can also conserve moisture. This mulch here can conserve the moisture later in the growing season. So if it does dry out, you might actually have a little bit more water in the fields. And that mulch also is preventing late season weed emergence. So that's a thing that farmers are reporting, that in this study, that they're not having to spray at that later part in the season because of the weeds are being suppressed. So you do sometimes need special equipment or modifying your equipment to make it happen. Of course, management is complicated. You know, you got to make sure that you can get out there. So sometimes it can get out of hand if you can't get out there in time. So that could be a problem. You may have to apply nitrogen to offset the extra carbon. There is a belief that the soils are cooler. It can definitely delay or make uneven stand establishment. And so, yeah, getting that timing right is also important. So it's not a free ride, of course, but we're looking into it anyway. So we're looking at planting green using a quantitative approach to assess multifunctionality and service interactions. So like I said, we had 19 farms total in the network. They're not all doing replicated trials, but we have 5 farms in the network that are using this particular design that I'm about to show you. So that there's these 6 cover crop treatments. We're measuring 9 ecosystem services, and some of the farms are 3 years, some of them are 5 years. The ones that I'm showing you today are just a 3-year. So looking at the design, like I said, there's 6 total treatments. So I think you can see this cursor, right? This white arrow. Yeah. Okay. So what we have here is the 3 main treatments are, I called it fallow, or it's basically a 0 cover crop, but some of the farms aren't spraying, or sometimes there's a volunteer from the previous crop will pop up. So there may be cover there. I'm not trying to say there's nothing, but it's not planted into cover anyway. So and then there's a 1X treatment, which is basically the farmer and the consultant decide like what they think the best planting rate is. And then they just doubled that rate. And that just facilitated the design because they could just basically make a pass and turn around and pass, make another pass. So it made it easier for them. And then, so those are the 3 main treatments. And then what we have basically is this, what they'll do at usually late April here is they'll do a pre-plant burn down, which is, I think, what you would consider like a more typical cover crop practice, right? So they come out and spray through here and then come back. So what we do is right before this burn down, we'll come out and take a sample of the biomass here and a sample here. And then they'll come out and do this burn down. And then we'll just sample the biomass here because there's nothing there, you know, by the time we get back out there to sample. So yeah, you can kind of see, I hit this button early, but this was actually taken in the fall. But you can see here, like these squares. So that's the fallow in the back. You might not be able to see, it's kind of subtle here, but this 2X is thicker, darker than that. And then kind of where this line is here, that's where they come by and spray. So half of this will get sprayed and this half will get sprayed. So we're sampling here, and then we come back out. Whoops, we come back out and just sample here because this is all burnt back. So that's important because when you see my tables or my bar graphs, it's set up like that. So this is one farm, just to kind of, again, see the difference when some of the sampling when we come out. This was the fallow field, so you can see there's still something growing there. And then this was the 2X, so you could see how thick that can get, that they're going to be planting into. And then this is another farm, but this is kind of, again, what it looks like in real life, this burn down area. So you could see like this one's maybe not as clear, but it's harder. You can't get any sample from there. There's really nothing growing. So these are the things that we're looking at. So we're looking at the biomass of the cover crop, soil moisture and temperature at the time of planting, looking at the potential nitrogen availability from the cover crop, and we're looking at the cash crop yield and these other things here that I've already been talking about. So what we're expecting is that the later termination timing of the cover crop or planting green will provide greater multifunctionality than the earlier termination or no cover. So, you know, larger, you know, better planting temperatures, more biomass, more basically an increase of the biomass and also nitrogen. We were thinking that the 1X rate will provide the optimal results and economic benefits. So overall, the 1X would be best, but we thought maybe environmental wise, the 2X would be the best. So here are our results. But before I get there, I just want to talk about the farms. So it's Don Branton's farm in Leroy, New York. And I think he's basically a soil health celebrity in New York. So I think a lot of you probably have seen Don talk. So he has a 1,500 acre farm. So he has corn grains, sweet corn, rye, processed vegetables. He's not getting any manure. He's not a dairy. He's just doing this without manure. And he's been doing no-till for several decades. Cover crops, nutrient management, that sort of thing, kind of the typical stuff that you would think someone like him would do. And the other farm is the Pan Cow farm. They are a dairy. I've worked mostly with JD here, but his dad and mom are still farming. And they have corn, alfalfa, and they do a forage cocktail mix. They have 850 cows on 1,350 acres. Yeah, Castile is right next to Letchworth State Park, just to kind of give you an idea of where that is. Yeah, so they're doing strip till, cover crops, and nutrient management. So this is what Branton's field looked like at planting. So we're now taking the second set of samples, and this was the control. So you could see there was some residue there, but it's pretty bare. Here's where there was a cover crop, but terminated a few weeks prior. This is like terminated late April. And then this is what they're planting into. And then you can see here
we're going to have 3
sample. Somebody's got to be muted.
Hey, Rob, can you turn your volume off? Can you mute yourself? Rob Edick? Or I can mute him.
You've got the power. There we go.
All right.
And then here's Pan Cows. It looks similar. So this was actually taking at the pre-plant termination. So end of April, again, this basically nothing to sample there. Here we could find a few spots to sample at the 1x, and then this is the 2x rate. Here are the cover crop species and rates. So Don actually does a biostrip. So he plants this. So he plants so many that I just said legumes, and there's 3 species of legumes and 2 species of summer grasses. So he plants this where the cash crop, in this case corn, is going. And then in the wheel rows, he plants this mix here. And so, the idea I think here is to provide nitrogen and break up the soil, with the tillage radish and that sort of thing. And then here it's more just, again, providing nitrogen and some, just general cover there. And then the pan cow had just rye both years. So yeah. One thing I need to say here before I forget, but so the biomass data that I took is for 3 years. The economic data that I'm going to share is only 2 years. I didn't have the yield at the time for 2023 to get it together for this, but so 3 years of data for the biomass, 2 years of data for the economics. But basically, so they had 2 different rates of rye, and that'll make a difference, but just 50 pounds and then 60 pounds. So here are the results. So this is summarizing, 3 years of data for each farm. So Branton's is 3 years on Branton's farm, and this is 3 years of Pan Cow's farm. It's all summarized. So you're going to see some variability here, with the standard error, but keep in mind it's over 3 years. So there's just going to be variability from season to season anyway. But this kind of, I thought, was good at giving an overall view from 3 years. So keep in mind, this is the control really right here. This is the 0 plant cover crop planting, and taking in April, or I'm sorry, this was not taken in April. This was taken at the time of planting, but this would be considered the control. And then here's the 1x. So there's the pre-plant field. So even though this sample for soil moisture was taken at planting, we took that in the part that was burnt down. I said we didn't sample from there, but for soil moisture and temperature, we did. So you can see that soil moisture, basically, the ones that were planted green, had a little bit more growth, were drier. So we can measure that. So this is basically, the control was 17% and we're down to 15 or, 12.5 here for the soil moisture. So there's definitely drier soils there when planting green. And that was true also for the pan cow field here, the 1x and 2x, where there was something growing there, more heavier cover crop, or heavier cover produced drier soil. But the temperature, I would say, I mean, you all could tell me, but I don't think that, it looks like a big difference here, but we're only talking about a degree difference in the soil, and there's also some noise in the data. So I think that really temperature was not affected. I'm going to go ahead and say that it wasn't really an important issue. So the temperatures at the time of planting were very similar, and I would say not agronomically significant, but I could be wrong there. If a 1 degree difference in the 60s makes a difference, I don't think so. So looking at the biomass, so that's the above ground biomass of the cover crop. So remember, we took a sample at pre-plant and then we took a sample at planting green. And you could see a substantial, and in some cases statistically significant differences in the biomass, in the tons per acre. So so this 2x, you're not actually doubling the amount of biomass. So that's something to think of. Would it even be worth it? Probably not, because you're not getting a lot more here. But you are getting quite a bit more than, obviously, than the control. And that's true for the pan cow field as well. And there is a lot of variability, but again, this is over 3 years of data. And then for the, oh yeah, so there's the control. So you can kind of see what's going on there compared to the control. So this part here is the available nitrogen from that biomass. So it's not looking at what was produced below ground if there were legumes in there. It's just the above ground material. And Querine Ketterings has an equation to estimate the available nitrogen from cover crop biomass. So I used that equation to determine the potential available nitrogen from the biomass. And then what Querine says is that half of that nitrogen will be available in the first year for the cash crop. And then over the next 2 years, the rest of it kind of gets doled out. So half in the first year and then the rest over the next couple of years. So that nitrogen could result in needing to reduce your inputs, perhaps. Because yeah, we're getting, again, you're not doubling the amount of nitrogen from the 2x compared to the 1x. So I think lightening up the amount of cover you're planting is probably okay. You know, NRCS or soil and water conservation districts, you know, when you're getting cost share, they do want to really have a lot of cover there, but that's because their goal is conservation only, and they want to make sure that that cover crop gets established and it's functioning as a cover from rain. You know, but if that's not our goal here, our goal is to improve soil health and also make it affordable. So you can get, though, 50 pounds total from that above ground biomass, which is more. So, you know, there was still also some nitrogen available in the volunteer stuff that grew, you know, but you're getting double that here. And then half of that is available this first year. And that was pretty much the same story for a pan cow and also other farms. I'm just showing you, you know, I'm not going to go through all 9 farms because nobody's got time for that. But in this case here, yeah, I'm just highlighting these 2 farms. And then I did the carbon nitrogen ratio for these. And, you know, again, maybe someone on this call would have more insight to this than me. I barely understand this piece, but because I'm not sure there's like an ideal one you're shooting for, but just to be aware that, you know, planting green is gonna skew this carbon and nitrogen ratio a little bit. Like there was the rye, so I think that might be a little bit more carbon heavy. Yeah, so you may tie up nitrogen and you may have to apply more because it's getting tied up if this ratio gets skewed. So this is 0 because there was just nothing to measure in the field. And then what's the bottom line is the yield. So overall, for 3 years of data, you know, it's looks pretty good for planting green. You know, the yields are comparable, but this could be enough of a loss. You know, if you're looking at 200 for the control and you're getting 192, that could be, you know, too big of a loss for farms. But I will say that kind of the conventionally cover cropped field, which would be this one and this and this and this, you know, they're definitely doing well. So, you know, you could at least do the cover cropping part and not really necessarily have to worry about the yield loss, at least on these farms and the other ones that I'm not showing. You know, planting green is a little riskier. It does affect the stand establishment, but, you know, so that could affect future yields. But overall, I'd say, you know, it's doing okay. But definitely the cover cropping is not alone, which, like I said, is this bar here and this one here. You know, that's definitely doing okay compared to the control.
So that one is the one that gets burned down.
This one gets, yeah, the yellow one or golden one, those are the ones that get burned down. So this one, they're not planning to cover crop, but as you saw, there was biomass still growing there, just from weeds or volunteers. But this one here and this one here are kind of the conventional burn down. I mean, these get burned down as well, but just at planting.
But there's still no-till. There's still a no-till.
Yeah, there's still no-till. Yep, no-till planted cover crop here. Yeah, so this is kind of the last thing I have. So hopefully I'm got time.
You're doing, yeah, that's great.
Okay. So this is just the economics. I'm going to take a drink of water. So this now, the earlier economic analysis, like Brian helped me with clarifying, was the whole farm. This is looking at the plots. So this is the replicated trials, exactly the same setup. You know, it's the same trials that I just showed you for the biomass, but it's looking at the economics. But we had a similar approach, though. It was basically a marginal analysis. So we're just, you know, those plots were sitting there on the farm. 90% of the operations on that field were the same. There was just a few minor changes for the planting green. So we only looked at what changed. But there are a little bit of differences between Branton and Pancow's economics. So these are the same. So changes in value of production, the costs and resulting net income or the profit were calculated using the values of crops produced. So the yield and selected expenses, which you'll see in the table. Increases or decreases in the value of production for each year were determined by multiplying the difference in yield by the price of the corn grain or corn silage. So it's basically the control minus the treatment. So you'll see this in the table. It'll make more sense, hopefully, in a minute. So just for Branton, many input costs were actually unchanged among the plots, just because they did end up having to spray, basically is what it came down to, the same amount. There was differences in costs of herbicide materials used on the control and treatment plots for Pancow. All plots had one field pass for Pancow herbicide application, but it was weed management for the controls and cover crop termination for the treatment. So they had the same amount, but for different purpose. But really, when we're doing this analysis, it has the same economic effect. So there's a lot of numbers and stuff happening here. So I'm going to try to help you focus on the key parts. So this is now just Branton farms and 2 years, right? 2021 and 2022. So this side of the tables is the 1X. So you can see the 1X here, and that's compared to the control. So that's the control minus the treatment. So this is the 1X treatment on this side. And then this side is the 2X side. So keep that in mind. And then within the 1X and the 2X, we have the pre-plant here and the planting green here. So, and that's the same here. Pre-plant, planting green, pre-plant, planting green. That's not easy to say. That's a new tongue twister for the kids. So what we're going to look at here is that basically the calculated change in the net income, or basically the profit. So the treatments had a total cost increase for cover crop establishment. So seed and planting costs, right? So here's the categories that we're looking at: cover crop planting, cover crop seed. And you would expect that, right? Compared to the control, which was not planted with a cover crop, you know, you're going to have an increase because you're paying for the planting and the seed. So there's, so with the 1X treatment, sorry. So we had a $59, basically $60 and a $70 increase for the 1X treatments, right? So since there wasn't really any changes, these are the same here. And then there was this, you know, for the 2X treatment, it was $92 and $107.50. So the machinery and labor costs increases associated with cover crop planting items were the same by treatment plot, while the cover crop seed item differed due to the seeding rate, right? So that's why there's a difference in cost here. It's just, this is 1X and this is the 2X. So in 2021, the differences in profit ranged from a negative $74 per acre. So this is compared to the control, it's a negative $74, so a loss of income. For the 2X pre-plant treatment. And then it had a high of, yeah, and also a negative 94 here in 2022. So those were the lowest, those were the biggest losses. And then it had a high of still a loss of nearly $18. But for 2022, there was actually this profit in the 2X of 66.64 per acre. So, and that was really largely due to the yield increase. So yeah. All other yeah. So anyway, yeah. So you can see here, you know, mostly there's a loss compared to the control in profit. But in 2022, you know, this 1X, there was actually a profit increase, and it was associated with the yield. So it just 2022 was a better cover crop yield year, basically. So the same 2 years, the same table design. It's a little bit different colors, but it's exactly the same setup: the 1X, the 2X, the pre-plant, the planting green, and the same categories. So the pan cow treatments had a total cost increase for cover crop establishment. So you can see that here. And then there was a slight increase because remember in 2022, they actually had this 50 and 60 pounds per acre, or 100 and 120. So there's going to be an increase there just because of that. So you could see though that here they actually had the 2X pre-plant treatment, which is the standard cover crop. You know, the termination timing of it actually had an increase in profit compared to the control of $43. And the 2X pre-plant, which again is just the regular cover crop, actually had this $102 increase. But there were losses. So the 2X had a loss there for planting green. And then the 1X planting green also had the biggest loss here. So, you know, I wish they would had clearer results, you know, because it's kind of a mixed bag. But I would say that what I saw here is that the 1X pre-plant, so that's kind of the standard cover crop practice, had consistently highest yields. So
And I just want to clarify, when you say pre-plant, it's pre-plant burn down.
Yes, pre-plant termination. Yeah, burn down. Yep. So that's basically late April. They're terminating the cover crop a week or so before they plant corn. Sometimes up to 2 weeks beforehand. So then this 1X pre-plant, which is the pre-plant burn down, showed profit compared to control on one farm in 2022, but loss in 2021 on both farms, and one farm in 2022. So kind of a mixed bag. The 2X pre-plant did well with yield compared to the control, and 2X generally showed profit compared to control on both farms in 2022. One was for the pre-plant and one was for the planting green. So, you know, it does, you know, I hate this, I always say this, but it does depend. It depends on the year. Actually, Pan Cow has a quote that I think is in our case study for him, but in Pan Cow's case study is this. It's the treatment. So if you want, I'll share this story with you all. You know, you could reread it because his case study is just the plots. It's not the whole farm analysis. But it just depends. It depends on the year. Oh, what Pan Cow says is on the fields that it worked well, right? So, but on the fields that it didn't work, it didn't work well. It cost money. And then I called it the agronomic key takeaways. So we are seeing it dry out the soil moisture. So you probably can get in there a little earlier to plant, and also earlier to spread manure. The the 2X can double available nitrogen for cash crop compared to pre-plant termination. The 1X also does a good job. The soil temperature does not seem to be affected by planting green. You are getting the mulch, extra mulch from doubling the biomass. Potentially only one herbicide application, that we did get that reported quite a bit. So you're getting weed control, potentially getting some nitrogen cost savings, and yeah, limiting your glyphosate, so you might reduce some costs there. The last thing to share here that I thought was interesting was this. I showed this picture as my design of the field. You remember when I had the 1X and the 2X and the arrows? So this is that same field. And so you could see the squares here, right? It's like there's a square here and back here, and there's one here. So this was a couple years ago in the spring, and they were driving by and noticed that the snow remained in the non-cover cropped plots. So what does that mean? I'm not sure. The only thing that I can think of or want to highlight here is that there must be some biological activity happening in the other plots that's not happening here, that's warming that soil enough to melt the snow. To leave it in these squares like this was really remarkable. And my guess was just the biological activity must have been just enough to keep the soil, to melt the snow. So I thought that was interesting visual. But with that's what I had to share today.